Is it a good idea to write down your scope of work for your renovation project on the back of a napkin? I don't think so. Hey, I'm Veronica Woods, and welcome back to the Real Estate Wisdom channel. If you're new here, I talk about the strategies to build a more profitable rental property portfolio. I give market updates on the various real estate investment types around the Philadelphia area, including Delaware County. And I also sit down with some top people on my A team that I work with my clients in order to be a better or smarter investor. So in this video, we're going over part 2 of a conversation I had with home inspector, contractor Curtis Niles, and we're going to jump into a conversation about the value of having a clear contract with the terms and the scope of work to keep you out of hot water and court when it comes to your rental property investing. So let's jump back in. That's why it's important for people to understand, like you really have to do your work up front in the planning and documentations to kind of expect people to deliver clear results. And I guess segueing into like common mistakes that new investors make with managing rehabs, this is one of them, of just kind of thinking that the project kind of manages itself and not really holding anyone accountable for different milestones. But what else have you seen, I guess, would you list on your common mistake list?
Well, I think it boils down to a lack of detail. You mentioned that, folks write some things down on a napkin. Regardless if it's on a napkin or if it's on a piece of paper, it should be written down, but in more detail. I think they need to know as much detail as possible. I know from a contractor standpoint, the more detail for me, the better, because then I can go back to that detail list and say, all right, this was the specifications. These are the requirements that I was basically doing the work to. So there's no arguing, there's no dispute, because way back when my brother and I were together, some contractors like that ambiguity in a document, because then they have a little bit of leeway. So then it becomes this, oh, well, you didn't understand what I was saying. And it becomes this he said, she said type thing. And it's always arguments that erupt as a result of the lack of detail in these contracts. So to me, I like to see a very detailed contract, one that's clearly specifies timelines for payment and what level of work should be completed during those timelines, so that if it's a 3 draw type scenario where it's a deposit and a progress payment and a final, I want to see at the end of this project, well, this phase, what I should be seeing at this phase. For example, pre-drywall, for example, if it's going to be, we used to write up, upon completion of the drywall installation, the progress payment is due. Not and is it spackle and taped, or is it just rough drywall, no spackle, no tape? You could specify that. But if you specify, these items, then someone like myself can go in and say, okay, yes, that was done, and now you can release the funds. But it's when you don't have that specificity, then there's all this, ambiguity and turmoil that takes place because they didn't cross T's and dot I's. It doesn't have to be to every jot and tittle, but the closer you can have it, the better, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I think it's imperative that they specify, especially when it comes to the money part, because that's where all the arguments come up. What point in this project should I be getting paid? And someone's going to come in and ensure that that part of the project is completed, and that kind of takes away a whole lot of strife in a project. And it keeps people on their time, on their toes with respect to, all right, we're not getting paid until this is done, so we're going to make sure and get this done. And then when you say complete, is complete? Some people want to get paid and they get paid full amount and the job's not done yet. I'm like, why did you do that? I mean, how am I supposed to do anything with this now. Where's the incentive to get this guy to get this work done?
Mm.
So never ever pay the contractor the total amount before he's done. I don't care if it's you hold back $300 or $200. You hold back something to give him some incentive to get that done, or else once you write that check, it's hard pressed to get him back in there.
Yeah, that's definitely a good tip. Definitely.
Right. So just hold back something until you're satisfied with the project. Way too often I've gotten that, I've given, they bring me in as a third party, because litigation's pending. And now I have to go in there and document something. And I ask them, what does the contract? I'd like to see the contract. I look at the contract. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. The contract didn't specify dates or what level of work should be completed. They paid them all this money and it's way out of balance. And now we have these issues. So it should be in balance. I mean, if you're doing thirds, what's a third of the work look like? Most people don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But that's where someone like myself comes in. This is what a third should look like. And this is what 2/3 should look like, etc. So you need to at least know what that looks like.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Is there another mistake that we haven't covered top of mind for you?
Well, I know we talked about contracts. And not having a detailed scope within that contract without clear defined lines in terms of when to get paid. But I can't stress enough the importance of the contract itself. Some people do them without a contract, and that's just obscene. I mean, you just don't do that. So you definitely need that. And then you have to understand what should be in a contract. I know it's very tough getting contractors to even write an estimate, let alone get them on a job, and let alone getting 3. A lot of times we got to be stuck with what we can get, right? But if you're going to get someone, at least have someone else staying on top of that guy, because best believe, if hate to say this, but you get someone, usually if you get them right away is because they're not that busy or they're not that good. So if you're going to get someone that's not that busy or not that good, you better get someone else to make sure that they at least follow the script. It's well worth it to get someone like an inspector in there to make sure that they do follow the script. Otherwise, you're in for, some grief. Sorry to say.
Okay. Well, you kind of alluded to, I guess, another one, a mistake I'll throw out there is getting the wrong contractor for the job. Like there's people who are really good at just, painting new flooring, $5,000-$10,000 job. And then they say they have the ability to do a $20,000-$40,000 job and they just flop. So, how should people think about, my brother's friend is a contractor. I kind of trust him he's a good guy. I'm going to give him a chance versus maybe spending more money on a company that has a big back office and that kind of stuff. How should they think about the right contractor for the right job?
All right. So we have to understand some fundamentals, right? All right. Some of the fundamentals are, if you want a decent contractor, you have to be prepared to wait. If you're not prepared to wait, you're probably not getting the best guy for the job. You have to understand that right out the gate. Because quality contractors are usually booked for weeks, if not probably months. So that's the first issue you have to understand. So if you're going to, unless you really lucked out and got someone just finishing up a job, and usually, I'll be honest with you, when I was in the business, I was booked weeks in advance. So there was never that one opportunity, I just walked off a job. Yeah, so that doesn't happen. So you have to understand that you're going to get someone that's available. Well, he's not going to be that great. So you have to lower your expectations of that contractor right out the gate. But that said, not to say that they're not competent in various areas. They very well may be, but you just have to kind of find out in that interview process with that contractor, where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses? Are you bringing in subs to do this, that, and the other? And find out as much as you can about what part they have actually hands on. Overall, they're responsible for the whole project. But it's good to know, like my specialty was, carpentry, right? So carpentry, what falls under carpentry? Well, that's framing, that's drywall. And I was pretty good at drywall finishing, so I did a lot of that stuff myself. Um, Pretty good at electrical and all that other stuff. But find out what they're good at, find out what they're going to have their hands in specifically, and then find out what they're going to sub out. Not that you want to micromanage the project, but you just want to have an idea of who to go to. Well, it's always going to be the GC, but at the end of the day, understand that he may not have his hands on every part of that project. And so in judging that individual, he's relying on these experts in these other areas to do the job. And he may not know. Oftentimes they don't know what that finished product should look like. Many times contractors don't know what a properly installed HVAC system should look like. They know that it works when you turn it on, but they don't know there's little details that I, as an inspector, go into and look at, and I'm like, they didn't put this in, they didn't put that in. They're supposed to put this stuff in. This is not like extra. This is like basic. Water plumbing, water heaters should have a temperature pressure relief valve discharge pipe. I can't tell you how many times they put these in and they're not there. So they tend to, cut corners, and I'm not sure why necessarily, probably because they got beat up on the price to begin with. And so they're cutting corners where they can, and the consumer is none the wiser. So you really need to know a finished product. And unfortunately, some contractors really don't know what that looks like. They're relying on their subs. So an inspector type is a good person to go in behind them and ensure that what you're paying for is actually what you're getting. I think that's a wise move for most investors, to ensure that they're getting the product they paid for.
But I also tell people, I guess, a warning besides being too available is asking for a lot of money up front. Is a warning. So I've seen people kind of get burnt by that, and just not knowing that, in Pennsylvania, there are standards like the third, is pretty much the standard. But I've seen people push to get more, and the investor is none the wiser.
Right. There is a bit of a barometer there. Not that the law specifies, because it doesn't, but common sense can kick in here. So depending on the size of the job, should determine when thirds are expected versus just a 50% thing. It depends on how much material the contractor has to buy. If the contractor is providing an estimate or a proposal that includes material as well as the labor, well, then you can expect a higher front end amount. However, if it's strictly labor, there really is no need for a higher front end amount, and the size of the project monetarily should dictate. If you're talking about a $2,500 job, well, then 50% is not unreasonable. Versus if it's a $25,000 job, there's no way you should be kicking out 50%, right? That should be thirds. So you have to, in your mind, at least in our practice as contractors back in the day, if it was a sizable amount, say 6,000, then we would break it up into thirds. If it was 5,000, depending on if we're buying material or not, would determine if we're going to want 50% or if we can go to thirds. So it depends on if that contractor is buying material or not, where you should feel comfortable or not in giving up more than a third, if that makes sense.
Okay, no, that's good. And of course, we could probably talk for another hour on this, but I'll ask you one last question. What do you wish investors asked you during that home inspection that would help them in some of these kind of hurdles that we're talking about? What do you wish they asked you more during the home inspection that could solve some of these problems?
Well, I would say most of the problems that I see always start with the lack of a good contract. So if someone were to come to me and say, as a part of a home inspection, I mean, they don't know my background as a contractor possibly, so they wouldn't know to ask me this. But I would, if they were to ask me, how do I avoid some of these pitfalls? I would say 90% of the pitfalls start and end with that contract. So if we don't establish a good, clean contract in the beginning, we're asking for trouble. So for me, I would say make sure that that contract covers all the bases so that you aren't stuck in the end with a bad experience. Because at the end of the day, you want a good experience coming out of it, so you'll do it again. The problem is that most of the time these experiences go bad, and then they're like, I don't know if I want to do this again. So to ensure a good experience, start with that contract, end with that contract.
I want to make one last point before I wrap up this video, and it was kind of alluded to at the end of the conversation about not wanting the investor to have a bad experience or so bad experience that they don't, never want to do it again. It would be short-sighted for any contractor or any other professional that you have on your team that are so myopic in this transaction and try to extract all the value from you and not think about, hey, this is somebody who could buy their next property and we could do the whole project again. So again, everybody wants the investor really to have a good experience and make money. I guess let's say everybody wants to make money out of the investment deal. And by the same token, it sometimes really takes time to really develop that trust and rhythm with different contractors, and you have to be patient with that. So let's say you have a bad experience with contractor number one, that doesn't mean that you'll never have a good experience and that just kind of write off the whole real estate investing journey. You just had a bump in the road with a bad contractor. Next time you take what you learn, the lessons that you can learn from it, and pick another contractor and try again. It's really a trial and error situation until you really have a rhythm with a good all-around A-team to support your journey. Now, if you missed the first part of the conversation, you'll want to watch the video that's appearing on your screen now because we go over some more kind of upfront tips in the first part of the video. If you have any comments, as always, leave them below, and happy